Okay.
Yeah, we're now live, Chair.
Fantastic. Okay, well, it gives me pleasure to open the meeting then. So, thank you and welcome to everyone to the Northamptonshire Schools Forum meeting. First of all, apologies for absence. Raj, can you let us know who we've got apologies from?
Yeah, we've received apologies from Lee Hughes, and Annabelle Moore is attending as a substitute. And we've also received apologies from Robert Tite. We also have two new members of Forum with us from the primary maintain sector. This is Victoria Bull and Marie Lally.
Super, welcome, Victoria and Marie, and to Schools Forum, and we really will welcome your input, particularly around some of the discussions we've got on today with the delegations, etc. So welcome to Schools Forum. Thank you, thanks Raj, and James sent his apologies today as well. The next thing, sorry, is any declarations of interest. Have any members got anything they wish to declare in relation to the agenda for today? No? Okay, fantastic. So if we have a look then at the minutes of the meeting of the last meeting that was held, I won't run through the pages specifically. I'll just ask if any forum members have got any points or discussions, or if we feel that the meeting accurately represented the last meeting, the minutes accurately represented the last meeting. I've got, while everyone's just looking at it, just got one point on page 9 of the pack, which is minute 70 under the Pupil Growth Fund. Raj, it talks about halfway down the page, in response to the AD of Education clarifying that the sentence, until full funding was received from central government, the local authority will allocate this capital to schools. Do we mean capital or do we mean revenue?
Yeah, I think it's revenue. I'll go back and have a look at that and change that.
Okay. Outside of that, I was happy with it. Has anyone got any other comments in relation to the minutes, or are we happy to accept them? Okay, I'll take that as acceptance, subject to that, you just checking that for us, Raj.
Yeah, of course.
So the next one is the DSG budget update. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. So I've brought a paper to Schools Forum to give you a DSG update. Would you like me to share it, or are you okay to go through it on your own screens?
I think we can go through it if you just want to highlight the points. That'll be fine, I think.
Okay. So point 2 on it is DSG funding for 22-23. It's an update on the total budget that we're receiving, which is 333 million. Coming down to 2.2, the table shows the increase in DSG funding since December 2021, which is the additional high needs funding block announced in December 21, which is 1.889 million. There's a favourable high needs block import and export adjustment for 365k, recalculation of the early years block indicative funding based on January 21 and to January 22 census of 459 million. We have got a change in the table that's in 2.3, which is the recoupment, and that is relating to you've got 205 million, which is the Academy's share recoupment, 331k, which is the Academy's free school and high needs place recoupment, adjustment in AP free schools of 24,000, and then we have got a Park Juniors Academy conversion, which is 661,000. Coming down to point 3, which is the DSG update for 22-23. The latest DSG forecast position for 22-23 is shown in the table in just under point 3, which shows that we have a overspend on the schools block of 328,000, which relates to mainly relates to Stanton Cross Primary School, which was not part of the APT when it was set in December. So we've got a recoupment for that of 135k, and the rest is to do with classroom bulges. Central Schools block is forecasted to come within budget. High Needs block is currently forecasting a increase in funding, which relates to the 1.3. That's mainly due to the 1.889 that was announced in December 21 as a favourable import and export adjustment in July. Early years block, there's a reduction in funding on the maintained nursery school supplement due to lack of participation in maintained nursery schools, and that's given a rise to a forecast of an overspend of 27k. In summary, the DSG is forecasted to underspend by 1.24 million by 31st of March. So the recommendations are that Schools Forum are asked to note this report, and I will open up to any other questions if there is any on that. I know there was, we were asked to bring in a schedule of DSG sort of budget updates, but we can bring that to the next school forum if you'd like another update on it.
Yeah, I think at each update, at each forum meeting, that would be great if we can. I've got one question first, if I may, on the 3.1. Just so I'm clear in my mind, I understand Stanton Cross was missed off the authority's pro forma tool. If it hadn't been missed off, would that have effectively just reduced the amount available for growth from day one, or would there have been funding that would have offset that in the budgets, basically? So that's the question. That I can see the recruitment, but how would it have differed had we had it been included on the budget setting tool?
So it's not on the APT, which means that we've had an additional recoupment of 135k. Had it been on the template, we wouldn't have had that recoupment. Is that right, Yoki? You've got your hand up.
Can I answer that, Chair?
Yes, please.
So when I set the budget, what would have happened is if the DFE did not miss Stanton Cross off in the first instance, what would have happened is basically it's like cutting a cake, okay? In terms of slicing the cake, that means every single school in the local authority will get a smaller slice of the cake, basically. As a consequence of not including Stanton Cross at APT level, what it meant was every school got more of the school budget share, and as a consequence, it's put a pressure on our DSJ. Now, this was obviously it was missed off by the DFE, and I wasn't aware of it. And when I came to know about it, it was too late, and the APT was already submitted. What would have happened is we would have had our schools block allocation, we would have transferred 0.5% to the high needs block, we would have set the MFG as requested by Schools Forum, and then it would then, and if you remember correctly, when we set the budget, we have decided, there were options we had to make, whether to cap and scale the APT and at what percentages. And as a consequence, we arrived at the APT we did based on those scenarios. Now, had Stanton Cross been in the mix, the pressure would have been bigger, basically, on our schools block.
Okay. Okay. So it wouldn't have brought any more funding in. It would just
No.
carved up differently the funding that was there.
Yeah. The way it works is the ESFA expect us to fund the new and growing schools initially, and the funding will follow the following year. So it's actually lagged simply because, as you know, our schools funding is based on October census. So at the time of setting the budget, the school wasn't open yet, and so we haven't been allocated that funding for that particular school.
Okay, that's lovely. Thanks, Co. I open it up to colleagues on the forum for any questions on this report. If anyone wants to pop their hands up. No, I can't see any questions. Okay, that's lovely. Thank you. I think then forum can note the report for the minutes, and thank you. Thanks very much for that. So if we can move on to agenda item 4, Yoki, I think this is, oh, sorry, no, Salik, I think is agenda item 4.
Thank you, Chair. So this report in essence highlights the consultation that we requested school forum to approve in our last school forum, and what's come out of it. The school forum were informed at October 22 meeting that they leveraged to make amendments to the scheme of financing school. In order to do that, in the scheme of financing school, it says that we will consult schools before making any amendments. There were total number of responses were 35. Out of those 6 were duplicates. That means one school submitted the response twice with the same answers. So to make it accurate, as there are 40 maintained schools, we just took one response from each school. One of the responses were inconclusive. What that was they did not answer the question. They didn't tick yes or no. So the new total were 28, and 12 of the maintained schools did not respond. As you can see from 2.1, there was 22.5% that agreed to the question 1, 47.5% disagreed, and 30% had a no comment. For question 2, a similar trend was seen where 25% agreed, 45% disagreed, and 30% did not respond. Out of the 19 schools that disagreed, 9 schools commented on the statement about funding being withheld, that it was a harsh response from the LA. So schools asked LA to explore a strike system that came out of one of the finance seminars, in which schools are given 2 chances instead in an event of a return being missed, because there could be extenuating circumstances that might occur. So before holding the future funding back. Why this change is proposed, that's really important, because the S1 and 5.1 officer has responsibility for administering the financial arrangements of NNC, including the affairs of the school. In order to do that, we need accurate reporting. So the NNC Council are moving to report DSG in schools on a monthly basis to the executives. And to facilitate this, NNC needs to receive school information on a monthly basis. And not only that, we need the ledger to capture school financial information in a timely manner. To implement this, hence we went out to the consultation. This information will enable NNC to have up-to-date financial position for each school. In the current climate, that's really important, with cost of living very high, and we do need that information. So as outlined in 21-22 maintained school balances and schools facing difficulties, 13 maintained schools are anticipating a deficit budget of 679K, and that rising to 2.5 million in 24-25. This information is based on the 3-year budget plan the schools have submitted, which then are authorized by the respective governing bodies. And in light of that point, to ensure the financial information requested from schools are up to date, so the information contained in reports to school forum and NNC's executive are accurate, Regular reporting will also facilitate timely intervention by LA. And what this would mean is LA to intervene when a school is for causing concern to prevent it reaching from CFO and Director of Children's Services to issue them a notice of concern. Paragraph 2.24 highlights that notice of concern, which is in scheme for financing school. I would like the recommendation for the school forum that despite the outcome of the consultation, school forum has to support and approve the implementation of these two clauses within the scheme of financing schools to ensure robust reporting and monitoring to preserve the continuity and longevity of Northamptonshire's maintained schools. I open up the floor to any questions.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions. I might like to ask first, if I may, to get things ball rolling.
Yeah.
I think the paper clearly sets out the issue, but how many schools generally do you have a problem with? Is it a minority of schools that don't do the returns, or is it more of a majority to start with? That was the first question.
No, so the problem that we're trying to highlight is currently we have it on a quarterly basis, and we're trying to move to a monthly basis.
Right, but where generally speaking, do you get a large amount of compliance with returning?
Yeah, from the schools, yes, yeah.
Okay, so it's not necessarily a lot of. There'll be a minority of schools that will fall potentially into a sanction regime if we put a sanction regime in place.
Yeah, so I believe personally it's less than 10%. Out of the 3-year budget plan, I believe only 2 were delayed out of the 40. So that's 5%.
Yeah. Okay. The other thing, generally speaking, in my experience, where schools fail or consistently fail, other than missing the odd return because of staff illness or whatever pressures there are, where they consistently fail, it is generally around either not understanding or needing some support with their understanding of what they've got to do, and then there'll be a proportion that just ignore it anyway. So within the proposal, before you were likely to withhold funding, and I appreciate there's a number of strikes out, is there going to be an offer of support around it, either from the local authority or through any of the SRMA or other programs that are around, to try and help the school understand what they need to do to comply? And then if they reject that, then moving into a sanctions regime. Is that part of the proposal, or should that be part of the proposal?
So we had a finance seminar where one of these questions came out, and my answer to that is, of course, we'll provide support to schools, because at the end of the day, we're here to create brighter futures for these children. In order to do that, we need to support schools financially. And when it comes to that, and I did say numerous times that we will bring in a calendar, which will highlight as to the timetable when should school expect the return to be delivered to NNC. And if they are failing, they just need to make us aware, and we'll happily support schools through our SLA and our traded team.
Okay, and that, I think that needs to be explicit in the policy that goes out as well, just so there's no confusion with it. Can I ask colleagues if they've got any other questions? Any questions they'd like to put themselves?
Yes, hi Paul, Sandra. Really in the same vein as your question, has there also been consideration, or is it written in somewhere along the way, around exceptional circumstances? So as Paul describes, there's often good reasons why deadlines aren't being met or whatever, but actually sometimes the circumstances can be really exceptional, whether bereavement or a sudden incident or whatever. Has that been written into it or considered along the way?
So I'm happy to add that as a clause for there to be certainty around that element, where extenuating circumstances will be seen and will be given the leeway in a sense if the return is to not be delivered to NNC.
And can I just add, I think it's good to see that you've listened to the, the idea around 2 strikes. I think that would be valued.
Thank you. So Siobhan, hand up.
When this was spoken about at the last meeting, I think there were some questions around the monthly timing, and that this didn't necessarily fit in with schools in terms of sort of working termly. And I just wondered whether you did give that due consideration before bringing this proposal back, as to whether it should be monthly or should be around termly. And also, do you understand the reasons why so many people did disagree? And is this around the withholding of funding, or is this more around a workload issue of actually being able to get this work done on a monthly basis and actually deliver what's required?
I think predominantly the responses that we had were to do with the funding being withheld, because I can understand it wasn't clear about extenuating circumstances or reasons, but I can take that on board as well in regards to making the return as easy for schools to fill in, and support being there for schools in terms of to minimize their workload. But I will take that on board, yes.
Has anyone else got any other questions on this paper? Okay. I think, Salik, it would be useful, I think in principle then, the main areas that forum members have just got concerns not to make sure are baked in is around something very explicit being in the policy that provides support, and also that provides consideration for exceptional circumstances being faced. So either with those caveats, do you need, we can either agree to the recommendation with those caveats in, based on the discussions we've had. Is that
sounds fair? Sounds fair.
Yeah. Is all members happy with that? Yeah. Okay. Then take that as agreed with those caveats in. Okay. Yoki, agenda item 5, mainstream funding, formula consultations and proposals.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry. Thank you, Chair. So basically, my paper here is actually to bring before you the proposals I am intending to, of how I intend to set the schools funding formula once the schools funding settlement is released in the next few days. Currently, we are waiting for what our funding settlement is from the DfE. It's expected sometime next week. So I need a steer, obviously, from Schools Forum, how I will set this, the mainstream schools funding formula for primary and secondary schools for 23-24. I went out to schools a few weeks before, and I consulted schools and asked schools what their thoughts are. My proposal is set out in this paper here. You can read it for yourselves. I've taken as much census as I can from the October census, and what I've also asked is that I've used the figures, the primary unit of funding and secondary unit of funding, and based on the October census I've received back, I've did an estimate of what our funding would be. I've also built into the amounts that's given to us at National Funding Formula indicative budgets that was given to us in July, and also taken into account the building in of the school supplementary grant into the budget, and I've tried to compare how we've actually differed, what's the increase in funding from last year. So from this paper, you can see that I'm expecting an increase of funding of 7.87 million from last year. Obviously, this is built out of numerous factors. This is built up based on there's been a decrease in pupil numbers in the primary sector and an increase of pupils in the secondary sector, and obviously the various elements that I've tried to forecast. Now, the considerations I've needed to take into determining the use of schools block is basically, should there be any transfers between schools block and high needs block in the coming year? What rate should the minimum funding guarantee be set at? What funds should we set aside for growth fund and falling roles fund? And, are there any decisions we need to submit as a application request to the Secretary of State? We are allowed to transfer 0.5% from schools block to high needs block with the approval of schools forum. Now, last year or in the current year, we have transferred 0.5% from the 22-23 funding allocation to high needs block from schools block, which equated to 1.274 million. Now, this year, following on from the forecast of that Soraya just showed you of what we expect the outturn to be for 22-23, we are not asking for this to happen in 23-24. So what we're proposing in the proposals, I'm setting aside, we have to we have also to ask a question of, do we set an MFG at 0.5%, or do we set it at a minimum increase of 0.0%, because that is the range that we have to work within. I've also did some modeling, and out of the modeling, the difference isn't very much. Obviously, if we were to set a minimum funding guarantee of 0%, we will have, less schools obviously relying on minimum funding guarantee. But if we say 0.5%, I have 7 more schools that rely on minimum funding guarantee. So the difference isn't very much. I think from the numbers I've modeled, it was roughly about £30,000. So what we have decided, or we are proposing now, is that we have basically, one of the things that I mentioned earlier, we have to fund, DFE expect us to fund new and growing schools. Now for next year, I'm expecting there'll be 2 new schools. One will be Stanton Cross Primary. They will have an extra 2 form entry opening in year R next September, which we will not have funding for. So I will need to build that into the school budget setting. We will also have the opening of Weldon Village Academy, and I'm expecting them to have 4 form entry. If that does materialize, again, I will need to build that into our school's funding formula. And again, we would not have been funded for them as well until next, the next year's funding, because their children haven't arrived yet. So there will be 6 form entries I will need to build into, our school budget, which will put pressure obviously on schools block. So what we're proposing is, based on the outcomes of my consultation, obviously all schools are in favor of setting 0.5% MFG. And so what I'm proposing is we will continue to adopt the national funding formula values as we already mirror the national funding formula. We are one of the LAs that are considered to mirror the national funding formula. We will continue to use the local factors for split sites in 23-24, unless otherwise instructed by the DFE when they release the settlement, but I doubt very much so. The minimum funding guarantee will be set at 0.5%, which is the maximum I can give schools. There will be no transfer to high needs block, which means that moving forward, in 23-24, 100% of the funding is protected for schools, and any remaining funding in schools block will be allocated to growth fund. So basically, the entire schools block is kept within schools block. I'm asking Schools Forum to approve the items in this report, and also obviously the delegation report, so that I can proceed to, prepare the schools funding formula for 23-24 once settlement is actually released. Thank you.
Thank you, Yoki. There's a lot of information packed into that report, and the feedback on the consultation. I've just got one question myself before then I'll open this up. Just as a starter, the transfer we talked about from the schools block to the high needs block for the current year.
Yeah.
Am I correct in thinking, obviously this is a forecast, so it's not the outturn, and that forecast can change. But given that we didn't bring a deficit, I think, into the current year, and that we've got now potentially an underspend on the high needs because we've transferred that extra 0.5% in the current year, 22-23, is it correct to assume that when we go into 23-24, if everything is equal and our forecast isn't exceeded, that we should be carrying about £1 million surplus in the high needs block into 23-24?
At the moment, obviously, we are forecasting approximately £1 million on the spend in the high needs block. If it comes in on what we're forecasting, then obviously we're carrying that surplus in the high needs block. Yes. Right.
Okay. So when members are considering whether or not to maintain a carry for a transfer for next year, it's with the knowledge that providing the forecast met, and we know how variable forecasts are get from many of the members have been in Schools Forum for considerably longer than I have, and will have seen the swings that you suddenly get in the last quarter in the high needs spend. But assuming that we've nailed it, then we will be bringing potentially a surplus forward that would relieve any pressures and give us a little bit of headroom without any kind of additional transfers in for the next year. So I'd like to ask forum members if they've got questions for Yoki on the paper. If anyone would like to put their hands up before we vote on the various options. No? Okay. So Raj, can I just make a suggestion?
Sorry, Paul, could I just ask one? I said presumably all this was put together before the government announced its additional funding.
Obviously the DfE haven't told us how they're going to, give us the additional funding. I have heard from colleagues of mine in other local authorities that the DfE is proposing to give us another so-called school supplementary grant, I believe, in addition, because they cannot change the DSJ. It was already announced. The NFF was already announced. But I believe that's what they're going to do. But time will tell. I mean, it's only a few days from them releasing the settlement.
Yeah, and I had heard that it wasn't all money for schools directly, that some of it was to put into the high needs.
Pardon?
I had heard that some of the 2 billion would go directly to the high needs budget as opposed to the schoo's budget.
Okay. Yes, that's because obviously I would imagine a lot of countries up and down the country, up and down the country, a lot of LAs up and down the country are actually experiencing an overspend on the high needs block. So I would imagine that's what they would do to address it, because the DfE already have numerous programs, one of them being the safety valve program to help, local authorities get out of their, you know, high deficit scenario. I mean, there are lots of local authorities with scary deficits. You know, we are probably one of the few that hasn't at the moment.
I think, Joe, I'd seen something like 400 million is likely to go into high needs out of the whatever it is, 2.2 billion was suggested. But what we don't know is the allocations by local authority yet of that money. I think it's fair to say. And I think, Yoki, just to finally answer that those figures are not, those were not known and are not part of the figures that you've currently presented, because the announcement came after the paper was prepared. Okay. Laura, sorry, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I have. I just, if it's okay, I'd like to ask a question, please. Just as I've said before, at Forum, Rowan Gate is now the only maintained special school left in the north of the county. And I just wondered if these figures include actual correct numbers of children on roll at our school, because we are still owed a considerable amount of money for children that joined our school as far back as last July that we haven't received yet. And that could have an impact on the figure that Forum being shown today.
The figures I've shown you here are just an estimate at this point. It is the best figures I could estimate at that point in time based on the census received by the data team. Now, we will get a settlement in a few days' time. I will have the APT sent to me in a few days' time. Once I've received that, I will rework those numbers. What will happen is I will then have a more definitive figure of what your school budget share will be for 23-24. We can consult schools before the next schools forum, so that you can then take a decision at the next schools forum. If you wish us to have a schools funding group, to meet to discuss this, I'm more than happy to accommodate that in the early new year. But it will have to be very early new year, because schools forum is on the 19th of January. Papers will have to go out a week before, so it will have to be either at the end of the first week in January, which is around about the 6th, or the beginning part of the second week in January, if you wish that to happen.
Okay, Nicola.
If I could just come in, I think the question that Laura's asking, and Laura, you know that we're doing some more recent work on the amounts of funding that haven't been paid to the special schools. So we're currently looking at that. I know that we've done the piece of work in mainstream schools to cleanse and make sure that our the payments to schools for high needs unit funding for mainstream children and unit, I think we're more or less there, but I know that there's still a piece of work that we're undertaking. So in answer to your question, that is still what I'm aiming to do in the January schools forum, is to present all of that information, and then what we think that the high needs block budget will look like for the next financial year. So it is a good question to ask, and as you know, it's something that we're currently working on, so we should have a much clearer picture.
No, that's great, Nicola. Thank you. That clarifies it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Neil, you had your hand up earlier. Are you happy now with the answers and questions, or is there anything you'd like to ask or add?
Thank you, Chair. No, I was only going to comment on the specific grant that's been mooted for the additional money, and I think that's been covered now. So I've heard the same as others have already said, but just to confirm what Yoki was saying, until next week we won't have final details of that. So we know as much as you, I think, on those things.
Okay. So looking at the request, Raj, we've got to vote on the 5 issues. I think we can give an indicative vote on them. I'm slightly concerned that we'll have some firmer numbers for the January meeting, perhaps, and that as long as the forecasts are broadly in line, that's not likely to change anything. But should anything come out that gives a spike on the high needs, that might change the complexion of whether we needed to do anything across the high needs budget or not, as the case may be. So the first 3 points, 3A, B, and 15.1A, B, and C, in relation to the adjusted national funding formula and the formula correction factors and the minimum funding guarantee, I think that the paper sets those out and the consultation sets those out reasonably well. So if I can ask forum members, if you are happy to support the recommendations on those first 3 points, or if anyone feels that individually there's one of those points that you don't feel happy with, but if generally we're happy to vote on those first 3 as a block and say yes, we're happy with those recommendations, then we can vote on whether we're happy to approve those first 3 recommendations first. Are you happy with that, Raj, as a way to progress these?
Yeah, that's fine. We'll vote on the first 3. Yeah.
Yeah. So forum members, is everyone happy to accept those first 3 points as recommended to Schools Forum? Can you just put your hands up if you're in favour of accepting those first 3 recommendations?
Yeah, I've got that.
Got that? Yeah. No, anyone against and abstentions? Okay. You got that, Raj?
Yeah, got that.
Right. Now, the other 2, I think, need an individual vote on them. So we've heard Yoki said about the transfer to the high needs block and there being no need to transfer to the high needs block next year, and explain why that is, and that there's a potential underspend this year that would be carried forward should the forecast be met. So on the basis of that, are forum members happy to effectively approve a no transfer to the high needs block for next year based on the information we have at this present time? And the only caveat I've got is that I think that if the forecast changes, we might need to revisit this, Yoki. But based on the information that we have, that we've got potentially an underspend, and our forward look sees that there'll be more funding coming in, which should hopefully cover any headroom, then based on the forecasts that we've got, there's no need to transfer to the high needs block. So can I ask forum members if you're happy to approve that, if you could pop your hands up.
Yeah, I've got that.
Got that? I think that's everyone, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then finally, the other one then on the schools block, the remaining schools block allocated to the growth fund. That's quite a substantial pot of money into the growth fund, but there is quite a bit of unfunded growth. And again, I would imagine that if we do allocate a full 0.5% into the growth fund and we don't need that, then it will carry forward and we wouldn't need to allocate anything in the following year. Would that be correct, Yoki?
Chair, that is the only place the remaining money could go, to be perfectly honest, unless you create a falling roles fund. Because I cannot give schools anything more than 0.5% MFG at this particular point in time, and we've already mirrored the NFF. So this is the first year of the direct national funding formula in the transition to direct national funding formula. So the DFE is more than, it's very likely we will not, the Secretary of State will not agree to us transferring more than 0.5%, to schools, basically. They have said that when we've asked them.
Okay, well, based on that then, are we
It's
happy
the only
to...
place all the remaining funding could go, and which is the Schools Growth Fund, unless you want to create a Falling Rose Fund.
I think we've discussed that previously. I think at the present time we're happy with just putting the funding into the Growth Fund. So can I ask forum members then, if everyone could put their hand up if they're happy to vote for the remaining funding to go into the Growth Fund. Okay.
Yeah, noted that.
And anyone against?
Okay.
And any abstentions?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that was a majority to go in the Growth Fund. Is that right, Raj? And
yeah, right.
Thank you for bearing with me on that, forum members. I wanted, I say, just to make sure that we've got all views represented clearly on those issues before we move on. So Neil, yourself, I think, and Richard, on behalf of the trade unions, is attending to talk about the de-delegation of trade union facilities time.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I will hand over to Richard in a second. So thank you, Richard, for attending. So the paper before the Schools Forum is one that's received annually in relation to the de-delegation of resources to support trade union facilities time from maintained schools only. So just to be clear, this is about a pot of money that is available to and taken from the maintained schools en masse to create an economy of scale of supporting the trade union facilities work as set out in the paper. The majority of local authorities operate such a system, and this has happened in Northamptonshire over many years, and I'm sure members who've been on forum for some years will recognise this paper and how it works. The local authority obviously recognises trade unions and works with trade unions. We meet regularly, and support is provided through the council as well as through schools. But this supports the work that trade unions do specifically in schools, and in this case specifically in maintained schools. So the decision here is for maintained schools to take as to whether they wish to continue with this arrangement. What you'll see, the paper doesn't propose a level of funding. What it does is set out the level of funding that's been used in recent years and actually has been remained unchanged for some time, and then sets out the range of options that would change from where it currently is to quite a high level of about £9 per pupil, which will create additional capacity. Richard may wish to speak about that, about the level we take. I think the choice for today would be, Chair, we could ask members to take a view as to the level, or we could ask members to go away and consult with their constituent members from the maintained schools and come back next time with a further decision about this. If we take the decision today that we are going to do it, the actual level can be set at the next meeting. That would be helpful for a further comment. But once again, Richard may want to comment on that. So once again, it's a continuation of the existing arrangements for maintained schools. There are alternative arrangements for academies, which I'll talk about at the end of this, but the paper specifically is about the de-delegation of funding for maintained schools and on a basis that the local authority operates. Hopefully that's a suitable introduction. Richard, can I hand over to you at that stage to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Neil. And we do have members of other unions represented on the call. I'm just going to refer you to Appendix 3 in the paper. Which what we'd quite like to do is for head teachers to go and talk to their other head teachers of maintained schools, consider the implications as set out in the appendix, to come back with a decision, whether you make that today or whether you make that on the 19th of January. I'm going to overview in terms of our increased workload and what we do, and then I'm going to hand over to Kathy just to talk about some of the intricacies between the maintained stuff and the academies and numbers and stuff. So firstly, I think we all recognise that actually the value of having the facility time. And the bottom line is the consequence of not agreeing facility time is that issues may escalate more quickly and resolutions may come across more slowly, costing you time and money. This year, there's been some big impact on our work, mainly the coming out of the pandemic, but also the change to outsourcing the HR providers. Your HR providers are either somewhere like Strictly Education or EPM. We have a good working relationship with them, and any advice you get from them, we can work directly with them, so they can advise you as head teachers more appropriately, and we can advise our members more appropriately. So we have a good working relationship with those HR providers, and it helps you to get on with being the head teacher of your schools. We do tend to protect you. You may not know this, but we do tend to protect you from unnecessary stuff coming to your door. So, for example, I will get calls saying, "Oh, I've been working in year 3 for so many years, and the head teachers put me in year 1." And basically, we turn around to them and say, "Well, the head teacher can do that. You know, they need to manage the needs of the school." So we do work with you as well as with our members. Coming out of the pandemic, lots of people have been looking at their state of play in terms of their working career. A lot of them have looked at the early retirement, or because of the pandemic have gone into ill health or have ill health issues. So I'm sure you know, trying to retain staff in the profession in terms of particularly with support staff in these current times has been difficult. So we've been trying to support staff of returning to work, and making sure they don't leave the profession, because we know that we all need them. I think there's the usual stuff in terms of disciplinaries and stuff, and as unions we're there to make sure there's a fair process. We understand the pressures for you in terms of safeguarding and getting all of those procedures correct, and we hopefully you'll find that we support you with that. But again, predominantly it's about trying to our main aim is we want happy staff in happy schools supporting the local community. It has having independent HR providers has had an impact on our work, mainly because we have to do a lot more liaison with those than we did with the local authority. And it also means that we do not get the heads up as early as we ever used to. The local authority now does not get any kind of reports in terms of any HR matters that are going on within the maintained schools, and we remain a vital link for that. But when it comes to restructuring, redundancies, TUPE, or moving to academies, we have been asked to attend consultation meetings at very short notice, sometimes as little as 2 days. And we're working on that. We're working with the HR providers in the schools to ask them to give us a little bit more notice. But if we take the facilities time away, the chances are that we're not going to be able to react to those things as quickly as we used to. And it also means that you won't necessarily be able to enter into a meaningful consultation in the timescales that you want them to. So these are all the benefits of getting the facility time. I wish we all had a crystal ball going back from last April. We recognise your costs have spiralled. In the past, we've tried to work with you to try and keep the cost per pupil down to a minimum. And we kind of kept it at £2.10 last year, just because we knew we'd just come out of, through the pandemic. We changed to unitary authorities, and we also know that there was going to be a increase for you in national insurance contributions for your staff. And obviously we couldn't predict what would go on with the energy crisis either. The East Midlands average for cost per pupil ranges at about £3.56, £3.57 per pupil, but we understand, and Yoki will say this, you know, they can't that you can't agree a deficit budget with that. Obviously, the more academy schools that buy into it, the less it will cost you. But I'll hand over to Kathy regarding those issues. But what I would really like from this meeting is for you to be able to discuss the Appendix 3 within yourselves and within your other colleagues in the main centre, the main sector, and come back and put a value on what that would mean for you. And obviously there's the table there, there's the impact assessment of what potentially would happen without having the facility time agreed. Kathy, do you want to add anything to that?
Kathy, you're on mute, sorry.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. Thanks very much, Neil, and thank you very much, Richard, for your contributions there. We're very open to any questions which anybody may have on this. And I also just want to thank the schools for the good working relationship that we have. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. My name's Kathy Symes. I'm regional organizer for Unison in the East Midlands, covering Northamptonshire. So just to kind of reiterate what's been, so Neil has thought that this figure, which we're looking at, this table here, is very much about the contribution of the maintained schools. And what this means is it would result in the trade union facility time for maintained schools. So I think the first principle, as Richard was saying, and as Neil said, is the agreement to the de-delegation of this budget. And I think that'd be something really useful to get covered today, so that is actually agreed. Once that is agreed, then we start to be talking about amounts and how that is managed. To be clear, any reduction in the kind of amount of facility time will result in a reduction of what is actually able to be provided to yourselves in relation to the schools. And at the moment, I think we work on a level. I know that Richard is very overworked, so we are just about surviving, I would say, on what we actually currently are providing to you. I do think that there is room for a discussion between ourselves and the council on the kind of the workings out and the costings on this, and looking at what facility time was used last year, and also being aware of any surpluses which may be around in relation to monies which have been paid in by academies and may be paid in by academies in the future, because it is very clear, as a first principle, is any reduction, if this is for facility time which would go into the maintained schools. If the academies are not paying in, then they will not be able to benefit from this, and that will have significant implications for some of the work which we do currently with academies, which is very positive, and those positive relationships that we have, and also for some of the agreements which would then have to be made with the academies. So I do think there is an area for discussion going forward on how we actually are able to work that. So I think the first principle is agreeing to the principle of de-delegation, and then we may be able to be looking at the budget. As Richard said, the average across the East Midlands is about £3.56 kind of going forward. Currently paid from the maintained schools is £2.10, and obviously there's a figure which is estimated within that at £2.95. I think to understand what the implications of that in terms of it says estimated facility time shared by the 4 unions. I'm not entirely clear what it would actually mean, but we can look at that either if an amount is agreed today, or because I'm sure that can be revisited, or if you just decide in principle to go for the de-delegation and we look at the amount in January.
Thank you, Kathy. Sorry, Chair, I hope it's all right if I sort of bookend this item.
Yes, please do. Or if there's any other of your colleagues, Richard, who'd like to comment as well.
Okay, so if I just put, so the only part I just want to be clear about something Richard said is that the pot of money that we de-delegate is to maintain schools only. So there's no cross subsidy between academies and maintain schools, because this is money that would otherwise have gone to the maintain schools, so there can't be cross subsidy. We just need to be clear about it, and that's in line with what Kathy said. I think that was clear. And I agree with what Kathy said in terms of the amount. You know, the unions do a significant amount of work in support of our schools. We recognise that, but equally recognise the pressure on schools' budgets. So it is a balance as to where you set that figure. It is a finite pot. Once it's gone, it's gone. In previous years, there have been surpluses, I understand, in NCC. I think last year or this year, as it is in NC, we're thinking we're probably going to overspend, actually, and we're sort of managing that, because that shouldn't be the situation. But I think that's where we are. But we'll come back in January with a better view on that, because there's still some work to be done about what that looks like. So I think, in line with what Kathy was saying, really, there are two parts to this decision, as far as I can see. Yes, we will delegate, and no, we won't. Be really helpful today, as Kathy said. And secondly, if we delegate, the amount for the current year is £2.10. I think there's a reasonable argument to increase that, as Kathy and others have put out. The level of that might either be able to be decided today on the basis of the paper. I think £3.56 is set as one level, and there are others within there. Or we can go away and have a further conversation with schools to talk about, you know, what would be reasonable on that, and come back in January and set the figure, having made the in principle decision. So, like I say, I hope that's a helpful summary for members. I hope you can see that the unions and the council are pretty much in the same place on this now, and we would welcome your views. Clearly, just to finish, this is only a vote for maintain school members, because it only relates to maintain schools, so we have to be very clear about where that decision making lies. So I'm sure Raj can advise and ensure the vote is appropriate. So thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Rachel.
Rochelle,
apologies.
Thank you. No problem. Just to echo what my colleagues Kathy and Richard have just said, you know, this is really, really important. And I think as trade union officers and representatives, we don't talk about this nowhere near enough. What we do head off in schools when we visit and when we go and do disciplinaries, grievances, meetings, academy TUPE meetings, etc. I mean, from the GMB point of view, we have a rolling programme every year of visiting schools, and you would be probably shocked and surprised to know some of the questions that I'm asked, and you know what we deal with. Even just sitting down with people for that short time and having a cup of tea with them can see off quite a bit that, you know, potentially could go a lot further. So I think, you know, I can't really sort of repeat too much what my colleagues have said, that what we do is really, really important, and we do save an awful lot of time and probably a little bit of heartache if anything goes much further down the line. Thank you.
Thank you, Rochelle. Are there any more comments from any other union colleagues? Are we happy to open it up to any questions from forum colleagues at the moment? Okay, I'd like to ask then, this is a vote for our maintained forum colleagues. So Raj, we've got 2 or 3?
There is, yeah, three votes on this.
Yeah, okay. So can I ask our maintained forum colleagues, first of all, are you happy to vote on the principle of a de-delegation for the trade union facilities time, or would you or do you think that that's not appropriate, and that the maintained schools would prefer to make their own arrangements? So are you in favour of a de-delegation? Okay, yeah, thank you. would you get, there's a range of options, obviously, on a per pupil rate. All of them, well, they're not all an increase on the current rate, but there is a range in there. Can you tell me if you would like to vote on one of those options, and are happy to do that now, or whether you would prefer to consult with your other Maintain colleagues and come back to the January meeting with a more of an informed view, if you need a more informed view on it, or have you already been able to do that? Yoki, can you? Yeah, hands up. So.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Chair. Basically, I need a rate. I cannot have a range of rates. I need to have just one rate, because that's all I can fill in my APT for the delegation to happen.
And that can't wait until after the next meeting. You need that now, do you?
I can. It does mean it leaves my APT, like, you know, hanging in the air, really. My submission date is the 20th of January, which is the day after our schools forum.
Okay. Okay, so can I ask our Maintain members, do you individually, do you have a preference from 1 to 4, or would you like to vote on them 1 to 4?
So I'm just trying to find my hand. Hold on a minute. Put my hand up. That's a clap. Never mind. Can I just say that it's useful to know at what each band would look at in terms of the facility time, and keeping the status quo in terms of facility time, how much that would be. The danger of having in less than that means that it will impact on facility time, and therefore it may impact on you as head teachers in terms of being able to get things sorted out in a more reasonable, quicker fashion. We just need that guidance from Yoki, really, because yeah.
Neil, sorry, yeah, you got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I take, and I understand Yoki's point, but you know, and whilst it would be very close, I think, you know, we did want to be able to give the Maintain schools the opportunity to have that conversation. But if that's not ideal, then perhaps we can move on. All I was going to say is, if you look at the table of the amounts that are suggested to de-delegate, if we take primary, the total amount available difference between £2.95 and £3.56 is only about £5,000. So, you know, the marginal effect is very small on schools. So you might take the view that actually, if as it is, and I agree with my colleagues, that is about the regional average, that would be the one to go for, and actually the impact on an individual school would be very, very small in terms of the difference between the two amounts. So, you know, if we were to go for an amount star, I think I'd like to, I would suggest the £3.56 figure if that fits in with regional averages, and as long as Maintain schools felt that was appropriate, accepting that the overall impact on an individual school of that is very small, accepting that all schools have financial pressures and those sorts of things. But spread across the schools, it would not be significant and would give us certainty, which would be helpful.
Okay, well, Raj, can I just check? We have 4 members who are able to vote on this, yes?
Yeah, I'll use that.
Right. Okay, so the I'll go through. Yoki, sorry, you got your hand up.
All right. I can only take votes from with the delegation. It only applies to Maintain primary or Maintain secondary, and they need to be taken in 2 separate motions. I mean, if I have a rate, I can tell you what the total will be at the next meeting, once, you know, the the settlement is released and the number of pupils are released to me as well.
Right. Okay. But I think, Raj, the vote, the vote is effectively, we have 4 members who can vote on this and on any of the de-delegations. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had a look. I think it's actually three members. So we've got two primary maintained, 1 secondary maintained.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I was asking. So we have 3 colleagues who can vote on this. So there are a range of votes. So I think essentially the options are for our 3 members to vote for option 1, 2, 3, 4, or for none of those rates, and look at a different rate. And those, I think, are the only options that we have available today. So I'm going to ask for anyone who wants to vote in favour of them in that particular order, if I may. I'm sorry, this is a little bit awkward because we've got a number of options with no recommendations. So I'm going to deal with that this way. On the plus side, the next de-delegations will be significantly easier. So if I can ask colleagues, does anyone want to put their hand up and vote for option 1? Okay. Option 2? No. Option 3? So that's looking promising. I don't think I need to go to option 4 or the other. So, Raj, I think everyone unanimously is happy to accept a de-delegation at a rate of £3.56.
Yeah, noted that.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for that. And thank you for our union colleagues for, well, one, working together on the paper, which I think sets out very well the work that's done and the benefits of having a de-delegation and having the facilities time dealt with in this way, and for the work that's done in supporting staff and of our schools and obviously your members. Neil, is there something you'd like to add?
If that's okay, Chair. So thank you, colleagues, for that clarity. I think that allows you to take forward, and I think from a union perspective that is a helpful outcome in terms of planning what the future looks like for their time. The follow-on from this is, historically, there has been the opportunity through something that looks like an SLA for academies to buy into a similar approach. And some do and some don't, has to be said. And I wanted to ask, and unions will clearly have a view on this as well, what academies' view on that was and whether they would want us to carry on offering that. I say that on the basis that as a new local authority, we're sorting out the ways in which we manage these things, and clearly there is an overhead to this, and we'd have to think about how we manage that and how it was costed and all those sorts of things. So having moved on from the maintain sector, I'm interested just to take the views of academy representatives on the forum, if having the SLA for academies is a helpful thing to do, and if they would support us to carry on with that. And if the answer to that is yes, I'll go away and come back with what that might look like for next year. But like I say, I thought it was worth asking the question because, like I say, not all the academies buy in, some do and some don't. So I'd be interested in Schools Forum's view. And once again, union colleagues might want to comment, excuse me, on the impact of that happening or not happening. But like I say, I think this is the right forum to have that conversation about whether that's something you would want the local authority to facilitate going forward.
Kathy.
Yes, thanks ever so much. I want to start off by saying thank you to Neil and to Rochelle, and obviously to Richard and for yourselves for supporting the de-delegation of this and the work that's been done so far to get us to this point. Again, in terms of what Neil is saying, we would very much seek to support the academies. The number, and our understanding is that historically, quite a number of academies in this area have paid in to using an SLA or the equivalent to benefit from facility time, which has been allowed here. To be clear, if academies don't pay in, so we do have some academies which don't pay in. So an example would be Brook Western Trust don't pay in, but then you are looking at making local arrangements. That means local recognition agreements to be signed up. You are also looking at making local arrangements with the trade unions in terms of the representation which happens there. And if it isn't coming from kind of a specialist facility time, then it may well result in delays. And when we're looking at especially when you're looking at some of the more specialist areas around reorganizations or 2Ps or some of those issues, or a significant when you've got big representations or more complex representations, there are risks of things escalating and not being nipped in the bud, and not those relationships not being built up. So we would really support the academies paying into this. If this may be something that you go away and have a conversation about again, or you decide that there's enough people here who are able to say that, we're more than happy. I'm more than happy, and Richard is more than happy to have conversations with you to be looking at the benefits of that in terms of any academies which are here today. But this facility time which we agreed is for the local authority for the maintained schools, and it's about being able to provide that into the academies, which we historically have done quite a lot within Northamptonshire. And I'm aware of there being some very good relationships both with HR providers and with academies which have come through this mechanism, which takes away a lot of the complexity which can occur when you have to set up individual arrangements with individual schools or individual academies.
Thank you, Kathy. Rochelle.
Thank you. Just to echo what Kathy said, thank you to everybody for supporting this. And again, I absolutely would support you going away and looking at the academy side of this and the support for that as well. Vitally important, especially going forward with everything that's going on. So yeah, thank you for that, Neil.
Okay, thank you again, union colleagues. And can we move on then, Joe, with agenda item 7, please? De-delegation school effectiveness.
Thank you, Chair. It's me masquerading as Joe today, I'm afraid. So I shall carry on. Oh, Kathy, you've got your hand up. Did you have another point to make? Don't think you did. I'll carry on. So this is a further de-delegation.
A minute, she's back.
Sorry, Kathy, you've got your hand up. Did you want to say something on the last item?
Sorry, no, I'm taking it down. I apologise.
Okay. So thank you, Chair. Yes, so this is a further de-delegation, once again relating only to the maintained sector. This is in relation to the support that we deliver through school effectiveness. So colleagues will be aware of the work that Jo Hutchinson and her team do to support maintained schools around school improvement and a whole raft of other areas, ranging from some elements in terms of moderation, but also around schools causing concern and other work that's undertaken in line with the regulations as they stand. In order to support the schools, we are required to de-delegate that from them, so that once again there's the opportunity for schools to take a decision as a group, rather than having to charge schools individually for work or anything that would be inefficient in that way. So once again, in line with the union, we would support a de-delegation in relation to school improvement. We've looked at the amounts. We understand the pressures on school budgets. So the amount that you've got before you, which I think is £12 a pupil, is in line with the current year. So there's no increase in charge for school effectiveness from the amount that was de-delegated this year. That's the proposal that's there. I think Joe's set out quite a lot of detail about what the team have been up to this year and the support they do offer. I'm happy to answer any questions on those, but more generally, I think this is about the principle and the level, which is at the amount set in the paper. So Chair, once again, it's the same group of schools being asked to approve the de-delegation for school effectiveness.
Thanks, Neil. I say the paper I found very comprehensive, to be honest. So do thank Joe for that. And I just want to ask, is there any forum members got any questions on the papers before I ask our Maintain colleagues to vote on this? Okay. No, then again, Raj, I think it's for our 3 colleagues. Can you, are you happy to accept the delegation of £12, effectively maintaining the rate that we had in the current year or have in the current year? So if I can ask for those in favour of the £12. Yeah, I think that's everyone. Raj, thank you very much. Then that's carried for that de-delegation. Can we move on to then the agenda item 8, please? Emmett.
Thanks, Chair. Nicola, I don't know, is Imtiaz coming to this, or are you going to cover this item quickly, or do you want me to do it?
Oh, sorry. No, I'm not aware that Imtiaz is coming, sorry. So I'm guessing that you'll cover that one.
Okay, that's fine. Oh, it's me again, I'm afraid then, Chair. Sorry, colleagues.
That's
so
fine.
This is a paper, once again, that's recommending that we don't make changes to the arrangements for the current year. So the paper sets out the approach that's taken in terms of exclusion, and particularly around the clawing back of funding where an exclusion does take place, and the reallocation of that to support, obviously, the child as they move, the pupil as they move into a new school. Once again, the paper is quite detailed, and I hope there's enough background for colleagues to understand and take a view on what's being proposed here. But to be as brief as I can, the paper is suggesting that we carry on with the current arrangements for a further year, and that forum support that on the basis of the information that's provided. So I won't say any more than that in the first instance, but hopefully that's sufficient.
Thank you, Neil. Again, can I ask forum members, have you got any questions in relation to this paper, in relation to the clawback? No, well, I think, Neil, from my point of view, on the basis that it is a continuation of where we are, and looking at the kind of rates and the factors, seems well, it's obviously very consistent with prior years, but it also seems quite reasonable in terms of the cost of providing, effectively the outgoing costs of providing for those children if they've been excluded. Looks reasonable, but I could ask just briefly, how does that, in relation to the clawback and effectively the cost of providing education for those children that have been excluded, does the clawback cover the cost currently that we have, or does it cost more to find a home for these children if they have been excluded?
So, as you'd probably expect me to say, Chair, every child is an individual, and so their circumstances are very different, and it will depend on the destination following the exclusion will make a significant difference. I think it's fair to say that overall the clawback doesn't cover the costs. Okay, this is about recouping the money that's been given to schools for the education of a child who is no longer at the school for reason of exclusion, and that contributes to the delivery of an alternative provision, or an alternative form of education, whatever that might be, rather than pays for it in total, because obviously the high needs block and the AP budgets pick up some of those costs in terms of the broader overall cost of those placements. So I think this is about being a fair deduction or recoupment from mainstream schools, rather than being an actual reflection of the cost of the alternative provision, which varies significantly depending on destination, as I say.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Is there And so presumably it is just a recoupment of the cost. So there's nothing built in. If a child was given interventions and didn't reach the point of exclusion, then the school would be facing additional costs usually anyway to provide that additional support to keep them in school. So is there anything within the proposed formulas that essentially is acting as an incentive to keep them in schools, i.e. by providing a degree of financial penalty if you have to go through exclusion? What I'm basically trying to say is there effectively a perverse incentive to exclude because it is more economically beneficial to exclude than it is to provide for the needs of the child? I know that forum members who sit around here, no one would be horrified to think that could happen in any school or academy, but unfortunately, from time to time, it might. And how do these rates compare with other authorities in the region would be my question as well.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So to start off with your first question, the process that we have in place and the rates that you see before you are not set to provide a strategic direction. Okay, they are set to be representative of the money the school has got and the money the school should then be giving back on the basis of having excluded a child at a certain point in the year, as you'll understand. So you could, as you say, increase these amounts in order to strategically disincentivize exclusion, but that's not an approach that's been taken locally, and I don't think it's an approach that many local authorities would want to take. I think there would be other routes to working with schools to avoid exclusions, which of course we would want to do and be involved as early as we can through the provision of early help or other outreach services, whatever that might look like. So I think whilst I absolutely understand what you're saying, and clearly the local authority is concerned about all pupil exclusions, but particularly where there's off-roll, what might be considered off-rolling or any of those sorts of things, which we absolutely don't want to see, and clearly Ofsted have a view on. This isn't being used as a tool in that process. That's done outside of this. This is simply about a fair recoupment. And in terms of other local authorities, this is very representative of how local authorities operate this. This is not unusual in this way, and I think would be seen as a fairly standard approach to recouping money following exclusion. So, like I say, there is a broader conversation to be had about how exclusions are disincentivized and where and when they are or aren't the right way forward, and we would always say there is a place for exclusion, but equally as a local authority, as you'd expect me to say, we'd want to avoid exclusion in every case given the impact and the outcomes for children who've previously been excluded, and would want to work with schools prior to exclusion to support inclusion in mainstream, whether that's in the school the child currently sits in or in another setting that's appropriate to meet their needs.
Thank you. Nicola, you'd like
well,
to add?
Yeah, it was just really to back up what Neil was saying. The local authority have been engaged with some schools to look at innovative ways of working, particularly at secondary, to develop in-house support and provision for children with SEMH. So it's your point, I think, Paul, where not the bit about, well, I think what I guess what I'm trying to say, so I'm not doing it very well, is that there are interventions and there are approaches, and we are working with schools to look at how we can support children with SEMH and to reduce exclusions, particularly the permanent exclusions.
Super, thank you. Forum members, if there's no other questions anyone's got, the policy as Neil has outlined basically is in line with other regional authorities, and as is very formulaic. And so can I ask forum members, are you happy to approve the policy effectively to continue as is. If I could ask you to vote if you're happy to approve that, so in favour of it.
Yeah, got that.
Okay. I don't think there's, I think that's everyone, isn't it? Anyone against? Abstaining? No? Okay. You're happy with that, Raj?
Yeah, that's fine.
Nicola, high needs update?
Great. Okay, so this I'm going to give you an update today, and I've sent you the papers. It's in the pack. Basically, you're asked to note the overall arrangements for pupils in units and mainstream schools who are receiving top-up. So I'm going to talk a little, just give you some headlines, and then I'm happy to take some questions. But thinking about what we were going back to what was mentioned earlier, just to be clear, the high needs block is around about 36 million, and what we're talking of which 34 million is tied up with specialist provision and mainstream one-to-one support. So today's the papers you've had for today covers the units, which is around about 1 million, and mainstream, which is about 6.5 million. But we will be sharing papers in the new year around the spend for special, AP and independent. So, you know, that does take a fair chunk of the high needs block, and it should give us a really clear indicator of what the projected spend will be for the rest of the year, and then looking for next year as well. So it is, what I did just want to underline just before I give the headline figures is that a lot of work has been done to ensure that we've got the right governance approaches, processes in place. So we've developed now service level agreements. We've been working on formula funding arrangements. I think a lot of the older arrangements were just based on our ad hoc individual agreements. We've also introduced termly reporting, and we now give out budget reports to schools, mainstream schools and units in relation to their budget. We're not saying we've got it all right and perfectly up and running, but we've moved a long way towards that. I think the half-termly networks that we've been having with the unit leads have been successful. That's improved our communication, and I think the half-termly forums, the Senko forums, have done a similar thing. So we are going to be, we're currently in quite a process of liaising for transition for our units for 2023. So the headlines in terms of the units as it stands is that we have 199 children placed in, currently placed, with a spend of 1.1 million, and next year we're looking at 208 with a spend of 936,000. SEM, that's for our SEND units, and then we have 2 SEMH units in mainstream, and each of those have up to 10 places, so that's 20 across the authority, and that spend is around about the 240k mark. We have, and I've talked about this previously, we've got some proposals for new units, so we're looking at around about 109 places which we're wanting to get set up for next September, and that will come in at around 327,000 based on 13,000 per place pupil funding. So that's where we're at with the unit provision. That's the headlines. And then in terms of the early help locality funding, so again, we've done a huge exercise to review what the existing funding was that was allocated to schools, and we needed to do a lot of cleansing of the information that we held and what agreements had been given to schools which just hadn't been accurately recorded and updated. So That's been really the work of the summer and this term. But so now we're getting there in terms of accurately recording and allocating support. We've done a lot of liaison meetings with schools to cleanse all of the information, and now we provide termly school statements itemising individual pupils, and that commenced in the autumn, and we've just sent out statements for the spring term as well. So we're projecting a spend of around about the 6.7 million mark. That's for this year, and because we had quite a lot of historical payments that we hadn't honoured in terms of agreements that had been made by the HCP team, we've now honoured those. So we're looking at a similar spend for next year. And I think that's it. I don't know if there's any questions.
Can I ask all members if you've got any questions on the high needs block allocation? Okay. I've got one then.
Rob. Oh, Rob's waving.
Oh, Rob, fantastic.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I just want to take you back, Nicola, to the both the existing units figures that you've put in the paper and then the proposed new unit provision figures. I'm just a bit confused by some of them. Let's take some of the existing units. Let's take the Corby and Wellingborough SEND units. You're proposing to keep them at 10 places for funding 23-24, but you're reducing, let's take Park Juniors, you're reducing their funding by £105,000.
Yeah, sorry. Right. So that table, thank you for pointing that out, Rob. That table should have read, because it's different arrangements for the units, for the SMH units, because they're kept on their mainstream roles. So we actually pay the 13k. So what we're proposing is it should, and apologies, so I'll make sure that amendment goes, that should be reading as 200, I think it works out to 270. So there's not, basically, there's the arrangements, it's worked out at 270 for next year.
Okay, for the two.
So that was well spotted.
Is that the same situation? Because you said 13,000 per unit place for the proposed new units when you get to 24-25.
Yes. Yeah.
Lovely. Okay,
now,
thank you.
The other thing that you might have wondered is, so there have been historical arrangements with lots of the units, and so what we inherited was individual children arrangements. That's why I want to move to the having a formula funding where we're very clear, look, this is the amount. It's great for heads because they know what's coming in per year for the children, and they can budget and work to that. And then what we said is, in exceptional cases, then we will look at those. Now, some of the schools have still got historical arrangements that have been agreed for the next 2 or 3 years. So that's why if you were to do your sums, you think, oh, hang on a minute, why is that looking like that? But that's the reasons. So we're much further on, and hopefully more straight with and clear with the schools, and also then that information will go into the service level agreement, which will be issued annually, so everybody knows where they are and what the agreements are.
Okay, thank you, Rob, for the question too. Has anyone else got any more questions first for Nicola? Nicola, the only question I got, which may or may not be relevant, to be honest, was around early years and support for early years. And in particular, the support around diagnosis and then assessment. Is that covered off in the paper in some way, or can you explain what you're doing to try and pick up higher needs early that hopefully will enable them to be children to be supported at a very, very early stage?
So I can tell you that there is a paper coming in January forum. So I don't want to preempt that, but breaking down the newly introduced Senate funding. And needless to say, yes, there's a lot of work that's taken place in, you know, the cornerstone, if you like, to SEND, which is to get it right within our early years sector. I don't know, Neil, if you want to add anything, but that's the plan, isn't it?
Yeah, thanks, Nicola. Yeah, absolutely. I think there'll be a further discussion at the next meeting when it'd be appropriate, and colleagues from early years, Judy and others, will be here to answer more specific questions. So I think that's the right thing to do.
That's lovely. Thank you. Thank you, Neil and Nicola. Raj, I don't think we haven't a vote on this, do we? It's a report for noting by the forum.
Yeah, it's just for noting.
Okay. So if no one else has got any questions. Okay, that's lovely. Thank you. Thanks very much, Nicola. Neil, we've got the sensory impairment services, which we were hoping to get a report on, and I understand we haven't yet. Are you happy to talk about this now, or would it be better to defer it until the next meeting if you require an opinion of forum?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The reason there is no paper this time, and apologies members that it's on the agenda without, is that this is making its way through the political system, will be considered by executive in January. And as you can imagine, where we're restructuring or reshaping a service, there are individual staff implications. And so now is not the moment to have this conversation. So with your agreement, Chair, as you suggest, I think it'd be better if we could defer this item if everybody's happy with that. And we'll come back and set out in the January meeting the proposals and how we intend to take the sensory impairment service forward. Just for reassurance, however, I would want members to be aware that there is no proposal to, cease or diminish the sensory impairment service that I know is valued amongst schools and does a really excellent job. It's just that it currently operates across North and West, and the arrangements for doing so need to change, and as such it's an opportunity to also look at any changes we want to make to the service. So we will come forward with a proposal that basically says how we will continue to do what we're doing, but how we'll also look to move the service forward going into the future. But I just wanted to assure colleagues that there isn't a surprise in this, that the sensory impairment service is going to be diminished in any way.
That's lovely, thank you, Neil. I think we've got one question. Thanks. No.
Hi, sorry, my hand went up for the last one, so it's a little bit delayed. I just wondered, with regard to the high needs funding that Nicola just talked about, if there is a dedicated percentage split between the early help locality funding and how much is set aside for that versus the HCP work, and if that breakdown is available anywhere.
I might have to answer. Are you there, Nicola?
Yeah,
oh,
yes.
Sorry.
Well, when you say is there a breakdown, are you imagining that we would have a certain percentage of the high needs block for, is your question around a percentage for plans versus a percentage for early help?
Yes.
Yeah, because well, in mainstream, you would expect that the majority of the funding would be around early help, because I think, what the green paper's saying, and what, I think the previous legislation was saying, was that for the majority of children in mainstream, their needs should be able to be met without the need for an EHCP. And often what we found is that it's to secure funding, which doesn't help necessarily the school to budget properly. So, what we're aiming to get towards is working with schools so that that the money would be available earlier to support children, the majority of children in mainstream. Does that help?
I suppose where I'm coming from a school perspective is if there was transparency that there's a finite pot, then people perhaps wouldn't wait until June to get their early help locality funding in, because the money might have run out by then. But if there's not a finite pot on a definite percentage, then we would do it in a timely fashion. They are very time consuming to complete the EHLF bids.
But the budget is, as it stands, what we're saying is the spend is around about 6.7 million, and next year it'll be similar. But it's like you know, where the funding, whether it's a child with an EHCP or with top-up funding, that is reviewed regularly, isn't it? So the way that we manage that the top-up funding is by reallocating. It's not with a child for the whole of the schooling. It wouldn't be appropriate for that necessarily. But some of the work that we are doing with a couple of the secondary schools is looking at because there's different ways of how you can allocate funding. Some is to do what we're currently doing, which is you apply for either individual funding via the early help, or it's through a plan, or you can have an amount that's a formula that is agreed across schools at a certain percentage, and many authorities have taken that approach, because then as a head you know the amount of money that you've got coming in over the year and over a regular, let's say over 2 or 3 years before that's reviewed again. So it's just food for thought.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for answering that and asking questions too. So the sensory impairment we will take forward. Neil, again, with the Homes for Ukraine funding, is there something you'd like to talk about today, or would you prefer to follow that up in January, other than hopefully you'll be in a position to start distributing?
Yeah, this was just a verbal update, Chair.
Right.
So I just wanted to reassure members, because schools have contacted me about this, and I know I've said this in other fora, so colleagues may have heard me say this already, that we now have had confirmation from the government about how much we're going to receive, and that money has started to flow. The decision has been made that money will be passported directly to schools, so we won't be using it for other work around this particular cohort of children. And that we are working with the West on this to ensure a consistency of approach, so that funding will flow in the same way, in the same amount to schools, because obviously we have a lot of crossover of the border of children, and we want to provide as much stability for schools as possible. Just a couple of notes on this. Firstly, it does only apply to children placed through the Homes for Ukraine scheme, and so whilst we have a larger number of Ukrainian families in Northants, it's only that subset who actually get the funding from the government, and we're working hard to identify those. There's over 100 Ukrainian children in Northants schools now, just to give you an idea of scale, and the funding will be passed as quickly as we can now to schools directly, with the amounts ranging from about £3,000 for an early years child to about £8,000 for a secondary age child. So I'm sorry it's taken a bit of a time to get this far. As you can imagine, the scheme was somewhat embryonic, and we had to work with the government to understand how it was going to work and what the purpose of the money was, but we're now very clear that we're going to pass it directly to schools. The final thing I'd say is there is a quirk in the system in that it works on the actual age of the child rather than the year group they're in, which is slightly odd. And also, it doesn't matter at which point the child was placed in a school, the school gets the full amount. So if a child was placed in a primary school in June, they would get the full amount, even though the child might be moving on to secondary school in the following term. That's just how the system works, and we will operate it as best we can in line with the government regulations. But hopefully it's comforting for schools to know that we are on the case and that this money will begin to flow. I'm hoping before Christmas, but we are running out of time for that, but certainly very early in the new year if not.
Thank you, Neil. Questions, Marie?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wondered about the cut-off dates for that, because looking on the DFE website, it seems to be allocated in quarters. But at the previous head teacher forum, Neil indicated it was the school that the pupil sits on at this point in December. I just wondered what the capacity was if a child moves mid-year for the funding to be transferred and payable quarterly, or is it just one annual payment based on a December roll?
Thank you, and that's a good question. So, as I understand it today, we the council get the money in quarters, okay, and that's happening. And Yoki confirm, I think the money has started to flow, but the payments are on the basis of a child at a point in time, is my understanding. But once again, that's the sort of thing we're trying to get really clear before we send the information out, and that's part of the reason why we haven't done this today, is because we were receiving the money in quarters and not even quarters. It's fair to say it was weighted across the quarters. So we are trying to get absolute clarity on that. But my understanding is the money to us is in quarters, but the money to schools is at the point the pupil is placed. But we will confirm that, just to be absolutely clear, and that's what we're doing with the rest of the money.
Okay, if there's no more questions for Neil on that, Raj, the school forum plan.
Yeah, so the next meeting is scheduled for the 19th of January. And as Neil said, we're bringing the sensory impairment service item back to that. I'll also talk to Neil and Yoki about what will come to the next meeting and the timetable for dates for 2023 and 2024. And that's it from me.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you, Raj. The other thing I'd like to say just on that, which I've asked Raj to consider, or we've talked about before now, is whether we continue with virtual meetings or sprinkle some face-to-face meetings in there. Last time we talked about this, we did look at considering one face-to-face meeting a year, which I can't remember whether we did one and then had to cancel it because of COVID and go virtual. But anyway, I've asked him to look at that with a plan, with perhaps a view, if we're going to do a face-to-face meeting, it's done in the summer term and not in the winter, which might be easier, particularly with the residue of COVID sitting around. But that will come to the meeting in January. So I can say, as far as urgent business goes, I've not been advised of any urgent business for us to discuss. So there's no items I'm aware of under that. So if, unless there anything anyone else has got as urgent business now, then what I suggest is we close the meeting, but I'd like to wish all forum members, firstly, thank you very much for attending today's meeting. I know how busy it is for schools, and I know how precious time is at this time of year, the last week of term, and it's really appreciated that you're able to, to attend the meeting that's so important to run through the business, and to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Okay, thank you.